Okay, this meeting is now being recorded. Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Cerulli. I am a product manager at Google, and I sit on the Google Steering Committee. And welcome to the community meeting. I will share a screen here. And we've got some notes in the meeting agenda. So I'll start by going through that, and then get through this. Are you now seeing the Google Doc? I can't see.
Yeah, we can see it.
So the first thing on the agenda today is the 1.4 schedule. Istio 1.4 is coming very, very soon. For people who haven't been involved in any of the DOC or planning meetings, we have been on this quarterly release schedule, which has been going very well, and I'm super happy with it. Our last release was in September, and so if we released a quarter after that, it would have been in mid-December. And we decided not to release in mid-December, but are instead going for a shorter release so we can still have that fourth quarter release, but not do a December release. So we're planning to release in the middle of November. That's November 14th. I think as of yesterday, the branch occurred, and the community testing first date is now on a calendar. So if you look on either the working group's calendar or the community calendar, you will see community testing day 1 is there. The details are not in the calendar event yet. That will come in the next few days. But community testing day 1 has been scheduled, and according to Anonymous Rhino, I didn't realize this, October 29th will be the second community testing day. So if you haven't been part of one of those before, it's just a day. Some people actually join a hangout, some people don't. The hangout is good to join if you have questions and will want to interact with somebody in real time. There's usually a little bit of a war room going on. So please feel free to join. There's a lot of different ways we do testing. One common way is we test the functionality by docs page. Say, take a docs page, make sure everything in there that's documented in that page works appropriately. So it's fairly easy because the steps that you need to do are well documented. They are the documentation. And if you have any problems, you can bring it up, file an issue, fix the docs, whatever. So please do join us. There were a bunch of events that happened this week. I happened to see all these on Twitter. I didn't attend any of them, unfortunately. But there was a meetup, All Things Open. Lynn and Christian were there. Lynn, were you just editing the doc? Are you in the meeting?
No, that was Dan. I did that.
Oh, that was you editing the doc. Okay. If Lynn or Christian is there and wants to talk a little bit about what the event was like, what the discussion was like, I'll open the floor to either of them. I'm trying to see if I can see who's in maybe neither of them came today. No, I don't see either of them.
I don't think they did.
Okay.
I did go to the meetup. So I can talk to that real quick. I didn't go to All Things Open, but I was at the meetup.
Okay.
But I did hear anecdotally through conversations, Christian was actually funny. He said, because it was at the end of All Things Open, it was like that night at the end of the conference, they were wrapping up. Mm-hmm. And Christian even said, this will be the last service mesh discussion of the day. Apparently there were a lot of service mesh discussions throughout the conference. So that was actually really good. So Lynn and Christian both spoke at the meetup. Lynn did a really nice overview of Istio 3, and that was great. So she went through all of the new features, a lot of the usability features, the install support. But what was really cool is she went through, as she was introducing each of the new features and the capabilities, she actually did a short little demo of it live. So she was showing some of the utilities and showing how those new features are exposed to the people in the audience. So that actually went over really well, and everyone got a really good understanding of what's available in Istio 3. Christian's session was right afterwards. It was about 30 minutes as well. He focused on more about adopting a service mesh, is what his discussion was all about. And it focused on reasons why you'd want to adopt a service mesh, and then how or approaches for adopting a service mesh. And the main outcome of that, or the takeaway from his discussion, is start simple, obviously, but his main focus was start at the edge. So really focus on introducing Istio at the edge, and then push Istio capabilities further down into your applications as the requirements arise and as you become comfortable with using the mesh capabilities. His point being that Envoy is like the key to all of this, but just turning on Envoy and splattering it everywhere without fully understanding how it works or what it does isn't necessarily going to be beneficial. And I tend to agree with that.
By edge, do you mean ingress?
Well, so yes, ingress, but fundamentally multiple levels of ingress, really focusing on more of the edge and API management capabilities that Solo provides. And then driving down and calling into Istio gateways within applications. And then as you adopt even further, drive down within a namespace or within a cluster, actually implementing the full mesh with the sidecars. So he gave a really nice progression view in his deck of how to do that, how to start with the edge with API management, drill down into Istio gateway, and then drill down into a mesh as you become more familiar with it. So that actually went over well. And then he opened it up to questions because he had a bit of time at the end for questions. And there were several questions, but it was interesting. A lot of the questions from the audience was more around adopting Kubernetes and moving workloads from a hybrid environment from on-premises into the cloud, and how to take advantage of service mesh when you're doing that. So there were a lot of questions in that kind of a scope, not necessarily directly related to his topic, but tangentially related.
Yes, I think that that incremental adoption is really important for almost anybody who's taking this on. Trying to do all of Istio at the same time is really more than you need. And it's not because of Istio, by the way. If you are just simply saying, hey, we want to adopt a new networking stack and at the same time adopt a completely different monitoring stack and at the same time implement a new security paradigm from 3 different vendors, that would also be an incredibly difficult project. Whereas if you took those projects serially, it's going to be really similar. It'll be easier with one project, but it's just a lot to take on. So do you know
and it was
video or any slides published from that? I didn't have
I don't believe there was a video. Obviously, they both had slides. I'll have to find out if they published those slides, and I can ask them to publish those slides. So
thank you.
If not, then I'll get that updated.
Cool.
Another thing that was interesting in that discussion. So obviously, Christian was focused more on service mesh, not necessarily Istio. But he did mention, and the question did come out, someone asked, well, which mesh should you use? And he gave a good answer, partly politically correct, but ultimately it came down to that he felt that Istio is the best service mesh, or has the best community and technology basis, and he does believe that while there's no single one service mesh to rule them all, he does believe that as the market slims, he said that Istio is highly likely to be one of the main service meshes that are going to continue in the future.
Right. Yes, I'm confident Istio will continue in the future.
Me too.
That's good. That's good. And I think it's important to understand, the state of the market, how the project's doing, how other projects are doing, and how people are faring. There were some other events out there this week. Christian had a busy week apparently because he did a video with Sandeep Parikh on multi-tenant ingress. That there was a low quality stream, but we've now published a higher quality stream. I suggest everyone take a look at that. I increasingly see Kubernetes, especially in on-prem use cases, being used in a multi-tenant way. In the cloud, I often see people spinning up lots of Kubernetes clusters. Every team that wants Kubernetes can use a different cluster. And when Kubernetes clusters are managed for you, that kind of makes sense. But in cases that you're doing a lot of work for each cluster, then people are tending to go to large clusters using kind of namespace often as the unit of tenancy, where lots of different teams are sharing a cluster. And in that increasingly common use case, multi-tenant ingress is a key part of it. So there's a video everybody can check out. I'm not sure if we published that to the Istio stream or not. I'll make sure it's on the Istio playlist. And then Megan O'Keefe, who's sometimes at this meeting and is not this week, she gave a talk in Boulder. And it is an intro to Istio talk. It is not a deep tour through the features. But it's a really good intro to Istio talk. So if either you're joining this call for the first time and don't really know everything you'd like to know at Istio, that's really Istio Boulder slides, has a link to her slides. It is a really good intro. I've given a lot of intros to Istio, and I'm envious of the one that she gave.
Dan, it's like your Istio a la carte talk, but way better.
Exactly. It's like none of the concepts were new to me, but I really loved how she expressed them.
Yeah, she did a great job, and it was very well received. She had a lot of questions after her talk.
And in fact, you were there. Of course, you were there. That's right.
Yep.
It was in your backyard, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Nice to be able to post that in your backyard. I actually pinged her earlier and said, hey, would you mind coming to this meeting and maybe spending part of the meeting on a talk, because she gives a lot of these. She said she'd like to. She couldn't this time, but I think I will start trying to queue up some stuff. In fact, Dan Berg is going to be hosting the one a fortnight from now, and wouldn't surprise me if he's got some demos. He's going to have all kinds of stuff up his sleeve because it is Halloween 2 weeks from today. So look forward to that, and maybe Megan will make an appearance. The other thing I wanted to call attention to was a tweet I saw this week from someone at Moss Mobile. Something went wrong. Come on, Twitter. Pablo Moncada Isla, who is at Moss Mobile, which is a Spanish telecom. They had very high CPU and RAM consumption for Pilot in their development cluster. This is not in their production cluster, it's in their development cluster. They started using the sidecar object and reduced their CPU consumption by 90%. And then they upgraded to 1.3 and they reduced their CPU consumption by another 90%. For those of you who are doing the math, that's a big reduction in CPU. So I wanted to point out a couple things there. First is that dev clusters tend to have lots and lots of deployments, and this is what they were seeing. That they had developers who were repeatedly deploying in there, and every time Istio keeps track of the changes, which pods come up and down and where they are, what their IP addresses are. And when you're doing lots and lots of deployments, that means that Pilot is tracking lots and lots of information and sending all of that information by default to all of the proxies that are out there. So it takes up a lot of resources. The solution there is to use the Istio sidecar resource. I should have put a link in here. The sidecar is perhaps a little confusingly named, since the sidecar is also how we call it, the deployment of the proxy. But the sidecar is basically a resource that lets you restrict how much any given workload knows about the rest of the network. You can say, hey, my workload only calls 4 services, so only give it the information for those 4 services. In doing so, you drastically reduce the amount of information that that Pilot has to track and send to that proxy. And so that's the first step they did, is they just started naming their dependencies using the sidecar resource. It brought their consumption of Pilot, as I said, down, CPU down 90%. The other thing that happens is Istio is getting more and more performant over time. It's much more efficient. The team is working hard on making it more efficient. So upgrading to 1.3 is also really useful. So I just wanted to call that out. It was really cool. And by the way, this it's just good to see some people publishing some real numbers. So their cluster has 500 services, 180 namespaces. It's a fairly good-sized cluster to 130 nodes. Yes, and now Pilot is not consuming very much resource at all. There was a comment in here, maybe it was on my retweet of this, from another company, AutoTrader UK, Carl Stoney, who has talked a lot about their usage of Istio. And he said, if you're using it at this scale, which they also are, using the sidecar object is essentially a must. You have to do it. So I wanted to call that to everybody's attention. Real benefits to using sidecar and real benefits to upgrading to 1.3. The next question I did not put on here, but I see someone has done this. So would someone like to speak to this question?
Hi, this is Srini. I've been trying to play around with the MTLS between services, and I'm not sure if it's okay to ask the query here, because I tried posting it in few sites and I did not get any response. So at the moment I establish a namespace level MTLS, I'm kind of getting this error, the upstream connect error. Not sure what's going on. So the moment I disable the destination rules and the namespace level MTLS, all my services work. I can show you in action. I mean, I can share the desktop and I can show you. If someone has an answer for that, that would be great.
If someone on the call thinks they can answer it, and Dan and Art are smart, they might. Then that's great. And if not, I can. You put this in a couple places. Did you put this in like in discuss.istio.io?
Yeah, I put this in the not in discuss. I put something else on the discuss. The third query which I had, I put it on discuss, but not this one.
Okay.
Yeah, but so you set up namespace level MTLS. So you set it up so you override the default setting for the cluster, which is, if you didn't change anything, then it's permissive, correct?
Yeah.
And then in the namespace, what's the default namespace setting? Strict?
Yeah, I put it as Istio mutual, and it's strict.
Right, okay. So then that means that all of your clients are gonna talk. Well, I guess part of the question is, when you're getting the upstream connection failure, is this between 2 services in the same namespace, or is this between services
it is that? I have a UI and a API. Both are services deployed in a single namespace. They talk to each other if I don't enable these settings, and it's all working fine. However, when I enable the namespace level MTLS on that specific namespace, this is what I see. This is the behavior I see.
Is this for workloads or specific ones? Maybe like kind of a database, or what is it for all type of services or just one specific one?
It's for all type of services. I tried it with another namespace with where I had Zookeeper and detailed stateless services. There also I ran into the same problem, and I tried it on a simple namespace where I have 2 .NET Core services, one UI and one web API, and still the same. Maybe I'm doing something completely wrong, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I put a link in to, and you might have done this. Pardon me if you did. I just Googled the error and found where someone had this, had raised an issue, and there are some debugging tips that help them. So if you've seen this, then feel free to ignore it. If you haven't, that's one place to look.
Sure,
And,
I will take a look at it, and I will probably post it in Discuss too, as you mentioned.
So the other thing that can be quite helpful is, if you haven't stumbled upon it yet, is if you're using, if you've got this enabled within your namespace, the mutual TLS, go ahead and use the Istio CTL auth-n command.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of that, there's a TLS check.
Okay.
If you haven't used that, I highly recommend using that command to check, because what it will do is you pass in basically a pod in the namespace that would be the client. And what it does is it will give you an output of all the services available and their TLS settings from its point of view as a client.
Okay.
So you can see if there's what it expects, what it's configured for, what type of communication it's going to traverse to the server, what the server is expecting, and whether or not you have any conflicts.
Hey Dan, can you repeat the command you run?
Yeah. How about I just go in and I'll just type that in there then? That might be easier.
That might be.
Yeah. Go figure. I can type. So like this command, Istio CTL auth-n TLS check.
Okay.
Check that out. It's extremely helpful. It's a nice way of going through and seeing what, because it takes a little bit, definitely read the instructions around it and the help around it, because it takes a little bit to get your head around it. Okay. But keep in mind that it provides you the TLS and the security information from the point of view of a pod that you choose within the mesh.
Right.
And you can narrow it down to a target service as well. So you can check it from, given a pod A, check against service X that you're going to call, and it will spit out the security settings that are currently in the system and how they're going to communicate.
Okay.
So extremely useful, especially if you're having problems like this.
Okay. Yeah. The next issue which I ran into is usually, say, as I mentioned, I had two services, a UI and an API. When I have I have Grafana and I have Kiali, everything enabled. And when I go into the graph, strange enough, I have all those headers, the X headers, which need to be passed in the request response enabled, and the headers are being passed across. However, when I see the graph, I see the Istio ingress calling the UI, and I don't see any graph connectivity between the UI and the API. Did someone have any one of you run into a similar scenario?
I have not, but it does sound like the headers aren't being propagated properly to connect those traces.
Okay, so so is there a way to look at the traces, let's say the request header, request response headers in getting passed into the Envoy header somehow?
That's actually a really good question. I would recommend, I know Lynn has looked into this quite a bit, Lynn Sun. She might be a really good person to forward this request to, because I know she's been looking at like traces and header propagation quite heavily recently. So she may be a really good contact on this one.
Okay, sure, thank you.
And by the way, just going back to the previous error,
Mhm.
typically that error, where you get the connection failure, the reset headers,
Yep.
it's because the server is expecting mutual TLS, but the client is not sending it. And therefore, the server side is not permissive. So it's not allowing clear text and mutual TLS. It's requiring mutual TLS, but the client side, the pod, your originating pod, is not sending the traffic encrypted.
Okay. Okay.
Now that TLS check will check for that.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
will tell you if that's the case.
Sure. I will run it, and I will. So once I resolve, I will share the information here in the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and I had one last query that was related to the headless services, right? So I assume the main branch, the 1.4, which got cut a few days ago, supports headless. Is my assumption true? And but if it is supporting, do we need any say Istio YAML to be configured, or does it work out of the box, the headless?
I was just looking that up.
Because in the release notes, I did see something mentioned about headless, but there was not enough detailed information on what was addressed as part of the release.
Yeah, and I remember part of this. It was around the mutual TLS support.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I don't recall that there's anything that you need to specifically configure for it. But don't hold me to that.
No, it's fine. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a Zookeeper working, and there is a stateful service where I am trying to go with individual pods instead of a virtual service. So I'm not sure if I need to do anything specific to get it working with Zookeeper, Istio with Zookeeper.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you don't. Okay, I see what you're saying. No.
Is that a stateful workload, did you say, Srini?
Yeah, it is.
If you don't know offhand, Dan, maybe this is just another question. I would ask this as a separate question, Srini, and discuss.
Okay.
But because they might go different directions. So first of all,
and I'm trying to I mean, we've supported headless before, but I'm trying to see exactly what difference we made with 1.3 with headless. I mean, it definitely appears to be related to just security, but it's not clear to me if that's the only difference.
I did search a little bit. I Googled around, and from a high level, it looks like in 1.4, they have added MTLS support for headless, but the release notes doesn't go deep enough, and the document doesn't say share much information. That's why I wanted to ask about it here.
Right. I was just looking at the announcement. It says better support for headless services with MTLS, but it doesn't make it clear what that means. And it sounds like there's no one here from the security or networking group.
Yeah.
Yeah, so why don't you ask on discuss? I can make sure that someone from those groups checks it out later today.
Great, thank you.
And thank you for bringing your questions. I appreciate it. And just so everyone knows, we do have different ways you can ask questions. It is absolutely fine to come here. It is also, we have discuss.istio.io and istio.slack.com. Slack, everyone knows that Slack is Discuss is more like a message board. It's durable. If you ask a question there, it stays forever. It's Google searchable, if I recall correctly. So if someone answers that question, I think we can even mark a question as answered, kind of like you might on Stack Overflow. So those are places that you should feel free to use as well. Well, for searching for and asking for questions. You brought up the Istio control off-end Tls check, Dan, and it reminded me that there's a bunch of cool stuff that's going on in Istio CTL right now. If you look, oh, maybe I closed.
Yeah, a lot of Lynn's talk, especially with 1.3, was about the Istio CTL commands, because there's a lot of really cool commands in there now.
There's a bunch of stuff in there, and in addition to the off-end Tls check, there's just a bunch of good tools. And if you look in experimental, it's getting to be really, really cool. There's a bunch of stuff going on. In fact, I saw a really cool demo internally this week, and I might see if they can get them to come just demonstrate some of these features here, because there's some cool stuff. So
the other one that's quite helpful that I really like as well, there's a new describe in here that's super helpful. Right.
Describe is great. The documentation didn't sell it. it describes things. So check it out. If you're using Istio, please look around here. And then the other thing, someone else put on, Microsoft launched a project called Dapper.
Yeah, it's me, Srini again. I did add it.
Ask what company you're with?
I work for Pivotal.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have not looked in depth at Dapper. The thing that was interesting to me about Dapper is that it seems to allow allow your app to respond to events.
Yes.
Without you having to adopt an eventing framework, without integrating with an event bus, and without compiling an eventing library into your app. It kind of sits outside your app and will call your app when appropriate. So it seems to be a little bit something like an event bus. The thing, so it's very different, where Istio is working primarily on synchronous things, where you have something that's placing an HTTP or a gRPC or a TCP call to another service, right? This is a different eventing model entirely. So I would say it's probably a complement. The thing that's interesting is that I frequently get asked when I'm speaking about Istio about, what does Istio do about eventing? How do you deal with that? And I have said, I think that we, as the service mesh industry, that's one of the unsolved problems, and one that we just haven't looked at yet. Because I think it is, if you have systems that are communicating, you've got something like Istio can say, hey, system A is communicating with system B. If some of that communication is asynchronous, you likely want to see it visualized in the same way. Of course, I'm thinking visually, but this means all the tracing, everything, right? So I think it's highly related. And in fact, while we haven't done anything in Istio this way, we are already shipping a sidecar. Dapper is essentially a sidecar for these asynchronous events. You could imagine building this functionality into Envoy and saying, hey, this can serve the same thing. I haven't looked at it closely. We have no firm plans right now to do that I know of. But I imagine.
I kind of think that there were, in the past when I was Googling, I kind of stumbled upon some link where Envoy was trying to get, say, asynchronous protocol, something like a interface defined, which can be plugged in with Kafka. I'm not sure where that project stands right now, but I did see some.
The protocol support that's being added, as far as I know, is still, if you place a message on a Kafka queue, you call Kafka, and then Kafka ends up alerting whoever's subscribing to that queue, right? You still know that you're integrating with Kafka. It seems with Dapper, it gives you kind of, and again, I don't know this. This is just from reading the blog post. It seems to me that without integrating with a message queue, you get some of the functionality. But again, I think that if someone wants to really dive in and come back and after having done an evaluation, kind of look at what they think is the differences, the complements, I think it would be a great topic for the community meeting.
Sure. I came to know about this project because one of my very close friend, he works on this Dapper project at Microsoft, and I did not see any samples for async. All the samples which they posted out there were all like services. There's no async.
Interesting. Yeah, that is interesting because I only read, I didn't look at the samples, I just read the blog post, which seemed to be about an eventing mechanism. Yes, so I guess the short answer is I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows.
Okay.
But if someone in the community does an evaluation and wants to talk about it here, I think that'd be great.
Sure.
So.
Dan, I have a quick question. I can't type right now because I'm on the phone. We have more and more speakers coming to present about Istio at the meetups for Kubernetes. So we're starting to examine the thing. Maybe we should start the meetup for Istio itself. Do you guys have like any support for Meetup Pro? Because right now Meetup is changing their policy. They will be charging also the people who is coming to the meetups. So I don't know if you're planning support or you have something in place where we, if we launch the meetup, we can get support.
We have not discussed that at all, Archie. I don't know. I actually don't even know what Meetup Pro is. All I know is that on Twitter, people are complaining about it. So to tell you, we will take this to the steering committee. I'll put it on the agenda for next week, and we'll look at it and decide. Would love to provide support for people who want to do Istio meetups. There is definitely interest out there for service metric meetups. So we'll take it up and we'll report back on that.
Thank you. I'll
put on our 2-week agenda. Okay, good question. And that brings us to the end of the agenda, so I'll open the floor and see if anyone have anything else they'd like to say, ask, comment upon, complain about.
I do have a question. I'm John from Cruise, and right now we are at a state where we have deployed Istio to our dev clusters, and the next step is just doing some load testing. And to do that, we have gone through a couple of documents, and we landed on using Fortio after all. And the first question will be, like, is Fortio the most common tool that community is using for load testing? What are the other alternatives there, people that can recommend? By the way, the reason why we picked Fortio so far was like both it is a good tool for creating generating the loads accurately, and also it provides a server components for just visualizing the results. That was the reason, but still I'm open for any other recommendations. And the second question is, like, how do you guys automate running your test? Because, like, okay, Fortio is a tool for just running them for a single time, but still it requires some extra work for automating it. So these are the two main questions I have.
Is anyone from the environments working group here? Because those would be, I can't speak definitively about this. I do believe we use Fortio extensively at Google. Dan, I don't know if you do something different over there at IBM.
Yeah, Yeah, we've got a combination of that and other homegrown tools for internal, especially around our Kubernetes platform for testing that. I was just pinging Surya to see what tools they're using for, again, from the environment squad, for Istio performance testing. I didn't get a response yet, though.
Okay.
Okay, in any case, I can also ping them from Slack.
Yeah, I mean, they would be a great contact, especially for specific Istio tests, performance tests, because they're doing pretty large tests around Istio. So it'd be good from the environment's working group to understand what tools they're using.
Because like we are just being a bit cautious about that, because when we deploy Istio to our prod clusters, there are like almost 1,000 instances there, and then we are going to go for multi-region pretty soon. So the load tests will be really critical in that sense.
Right.
And are your
totally
load tests on your dev cluster going to be the same scale as what you're running in prod?
No, dev cluster will be just close to 100. But we are also going to have a separate test environment as well.
Oh, okay.
So still things are in progress right now.
And what version of Istio are you running, John?
1.3.
Okay, good. That alleviates my biggest concern. Okay, yeah, I think that is right. That that we are using Fortio. I can poke around, and I know we've emailed in the past, John, so I do have your contact information.
Oh, yeah.
I can let you know if I learn anything interesting about, besides, yes, we use Fortio, and is there anything interesting about automation?
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, anything else from the open floor? Okay, well, once again, thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate it. Love the participation in the community. Dan Berg will be hosting next time. I'm sure he's going to have all kinds of surprises for Halloween. Can't wait to see it. All right. Have a good couple of weeks, everybody. We'll see you at testing day on the 22nd.